One Punch Man began life as a webcomic in 2009. Written and illustrated by the artist simply known as One Punch Man is the story of Saitama, a seemingly normal guy who wants to try his hand at becoming a rookie superhero. I say seemingly normal here because Saitama is so cataclysmically powerful that he can blow pretty much any enemy out of existence with just a single punch. The drawings were extremely crude, especially by Japanese manga standards, but something about the comic resonated with people, and by 2012, One Punch Man had over 7.9 million hits. Later that year, the comic was re-illustrated by the spectacularly talented Yusuke Murata of Ice Shield 21 fame, and in 2015 it was turned into a 12-episode anime. But why? How did this seemingly gag-fueled webcomic attract such massive talent in Murata? And how did it get picked up by such a high-profile studio as Madhouse? And more so, is it really worth watching? Well friends, that's once again what we're here to talk about. So let's dive deep and explain why you should watch One Punch Man. Some warnings here guys, this discussion will be mainly limited to the material covered by the anime as opposed to either of the manga. As per usual, I'll be doing my best to avoid major spoilers, but I will be going into detail about the world and characters, so minor spoilers may occur. So, for the people watching this video who have already seen One Punch Man, have you ever tried recommending this show to someone who's never heard of it? It's a surprisingly difficult thing to do, as telling someone it's about a guy who can beat anything in one punch isn't an especially interesting or compelling story pitch. It doesn't get across how funny or even endearing this show can be. In fact, if anything, it raises more negatives than positives. How are we meant to empathise or relate to a hero who never really has to struggle to achieve his goals? If a villain can never push our hero to his limits, if there's never really a risk, what's to stop us just getting bored and walking away? And yet, somehow this isn't the case. Somehow One Punch Man stays not only interesting but exhilarating to watch. So why? Well, why don't we start off by taking a look in the most obvious place, that being the show's protagonist, Saitama. Early on in One Punch Man, the show establishes three basic rules. 1. This is a world of superheroes. 2. Where there are superheroes, there will also be supervillains. And 3. No hero or villain can even come close to the power possessed by our hero Saitama. Now while this may sound like other shows, I promise you it really isn't. No show or piece of media that I've ever experienced has been so blatant in establishing its main character as a near invincible demigod as One Punch Man does Saitama. To give you some context here, Saitama as a hero is the anime equivalent of starting Pokemon Red with a level 100 fully EV trained Mewtwo. It's like if Goku could go Super Saiyan 3 right from the start of Dragon Ball. He crushes all competition with little to no effort, to the point that it's actually comical. Like, take this scene from episode 1. This guy right here essentially looks like the final form of any anime bad guy in any other anime. He looks mean as a motherfucker, and at first impression you don't think there's any way a character like Saitama could stand up to him, but then 1 second later and bam, he is down, he is out of existence. This is how a lot of Saitama's fights play out. Aside from the fact that he's occasionally a bit of an idiot, he has no discernible weakness, and no one that could stand up to him in terms of being a rival. All that said, the concept of an overpowered hero isn't a new or even especially interesting one, but it's the way the show grounds Saitama that separates him from other heroes. Like, let's take a look at Kirito from Sword Art Online, for example. Within the world of SAO, Kirito is insanely overpowered. Most enemies can barely lay a hand on him, and he's even able to shrug off dying. But not only that, Kirito seems to have a kind of celebrity-like status within SAO. He doesn't seem to be able to walk 10 feet without adding to his harem of beautiful women, all of whom, for whatever reason, seem to want to bone the guy. He's always the most important character in the room and always has the solution to everyone's problems. But the thing here is, unless you're really into the idea of being Kirito, he's actually a pretty dull and unlikable character. And his strength and status within the world only serve to alienate him further from the audience. Saitama, on the other hand, is nearly the total opposite. The world as a whole does not care about him or acknowledge his heroic deeds. He lives in a shitty apartment, he's unemployed, he goes grocery shopping, and he's mostly ignored by the superhero community. Even when he takes the superhero entrance application and completely shatters all records for the physical exam, he messes up on the written test and despite all his abilities gets ranked number 33 in the superhero's lowest tier, Class C. Like a lot of things in this show, this is actually pretty hilarious but also kinda heartbreaking. It's essentially like watching Superman apply to become a member of the Justice League only to be made the janitor. Soon after, public opinion turns against Saitama as he gets a reputation for being a faker, as there's no way a rank C superhero could accomplish the amazing feats that Saitama does. So even though in theory we have a character who can overcome anything, the fact that the world around him refuses to acknowledge it means it's hard not to feel a little bad for Saitama. I mean, we, the viewer, know he's great, but the world at large doesn't. What's more, when other heroes begin to pick up on Saitama's abilities, they sometimes go out of their way to actively crush him. And before long, it becomes obvious that the superhero community Saitama so badly wanted to be a part of carries with it about as much bureaucracy and backstabbing as, well, any other large organization. Because of all this, it's hard not to feel for Saitama. But in that way, it helps us relate to him. It grounds him in a way that makes him far more likable and empathetic a character, and much more relatable than your average OP protagonist. These hardships do, however, bring up what I consider Saitama's second major strength, and that is his unwavering mental fortitude. It's kind of subtle, but no matter how dire a situation gets, Saitama is never fazed, never loses belief in himself or his own abilities. If a problem comes up, he's going to punch the holy shit out of it, and if he can't do that, then it's probably not worth getting upset about in the first place. Sure, he gets frustrated and annoyed like anyone would, but even facing overwhelming odds, he never falters, and his character is written with such subtlety that it's always believable. In a way, he kind of reminds me of Akane from Psycho-Pass. In Psycho-Pass, a person's mental state is monitored by the government, and if it drops below a certain level, then that person is then deemed a danger to society and either eliminated or put into permanent rehabilitation. Akane's overwhelming advantage in the world of Psycho-Pass is no matter how grim a situation gets, she can maintain a positive mental outlook, which means that she's about as much of an anomaly in the world of Psycho-Pass as Saitama is in the world of One Punch Man. This may be a bit of a stretch considering how dramatically different the two worlds are, but in another sense, Saitama's unwavering belief in himself is what allowed him to gain such overwhelming power in the first place, while Akane is what lets her survive in a world where people attack each other psychologically, and losing yourself leads to the loss of freedom or even death. While Saitama's ability to hit like a fucking atom bomb is indeed impressive, the way he reacts to situations and those around him is what makes him an endearing character. He's not cool, he's not suave, he's just a normal dude, but one that tries his best and never lets the tough things in life really get to him. And by the time I'd finished One Punch Man, this was the aspect of the character that really stuck with me, even over his incredible attacks. All that said, however, while Saitama is indeed great, no show can survive on the strength of a single character. And it's fortunate then that One Punch Man has an absolutely fantastic supporting cast, all of whom play off Saitama in various interesting and different ways. This is especially important for a story like One Punch Man's because the supporting cast are essentially there to give us a second perspective, not only of the world but of Saitama himself. And there's no better example of this than Genos, Saitama's cyborg apprentice and only friend. Genos enters the show at episode 2 and has a fairly average backstory involving revenge and a burning desire to become stronger. After battling Mosquito to a draw and accepting that the only way to defeat her is going to be through sacrificing himself, he is saved by Saitama, and upon witnessing his awesome power, promptly moves in with Saitama and studies as his apprentice. What I find really interesting about Genos is how the show uses him in relation to Saitama. See, Genos has the exact same view of Saitama as the viewer does. Remember how I said we know Saitama's awesome, but that makes it all the harder that no one else does? Well, that's Genos down to a T. He sees the bureaucracy faced by Saitama and is constantly trying to protect his master from it. In a lot of ways, he reminds me of a kid trying to look out for an older sibling. It helps give a different perspective of Saitama as a person, and in doing so, makes him more believable as a character. That isn't to say that Genos isn't a good character in his own right, because he absolutely is. In fact, in a lot of ways, he is more the typical shonen protagonist than Saitama. He's powerful, but not quite powerful enough. he has a strong sense of morals and justice, as well as having a backstory that propels him forward. All qualities you'd expect from a modern day anime hero, and this in turn helps him and Saitama bring entirely different perspectives to a situation. Genos also wins points for being extremely empathetic. While he is exceptionally powerful and pulls off some real badass shit throughout the show, he's never quite as powerful as he needs to be, and regularly gets his ass handed to him by some of the show's more powerful bad guys. And though he tries desperately to follow in Saitama's footsteps, the oceanic difference in their power is always obvious, and it's hard not to feel a little bad for Genos in these situations. Another character who takes this concept to a ludicrous extreme is that of Moomin Rider, a hilariously underpowered rank C superhero whose only discernible ability is that he can, ride a bicycle. At first he seems like a joke character played mostly for laughs. He has a ridiculous outfit, and he's not any more powerful than really an average human being, which is why then that it is so harrowing when later on in the show he is forced to go up against the monstrous and terrifying Sea King. A villain whose strength and danger level are an order of magnitude worse than anything we've seen up to this point. The scene takes place in the pouring rain in front of a crowd of terrified onlookers, and if Moomin Riders fails, as many far stronger heroes have already done, there's nothing left to stop the Sea King massacring a crowd of innocent people. At this point, the show has pointed out multiple times both how powerful Sea King is and how weak Moomin Rider is, and watching him desperately try to fight Sea King stands in stark contrast to all Saitama's one-sided victories up until this point. It's a scene I found genuinely difficult to watch, but also couldn't look away from, and one that takes the show's initial premise of the superhero is unbeatable and completely flips it on its head. In this situation, there is no discernible way the hero can win. If this show was really just about Saitama, then moments like this would be utterly impossible. But investing in its supporting cast in this way, it means that despite Saitama's abilities, there's always danger and there's always stakes within this world. And the show is all the stronger because of it. This is all without mentioning the many other standout characters of the show, such as the bratty Omega level psychic Tatsumaki, the hardened superhero veteran Grandmaster Bang, and the androgynous anti-hero Sonic Speed of Sound. Yep, that's actually his name. These characters all react to Saitama in different but believable ways, and it's interesting watching them all play off each other. For a 12-episode series, One Punch Man does an incredible amount not only in establishing its characters, but also the world in which they live in. What's more, it also does a whole lot by ominously hinting at the potential of future characters and plot threads, like the suggestion that something really fucked up might be going on with the mysterious Metal Knight, or, and this one drives me insane, the complete and mysterious absence of the world's #1 ranked superhero, Blast. I mean, who is this guy? I can't imagine how he's going to fit into the world, but I cannot wait to find out. This shows that One Punch Man isn't showing us all its cards, and it doesn't need to. The world it presents to us is already exciting enough, but the fact that there's more to come is an exciting thought indeed. One Punch Man's fights are a curious thing. They're not tactical or subtle in the same way a lot of the best battle anime are, and there's very little of the psychology or mind games going on between combatants that you might get in something like, say, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or History's Strongest Disciple. But that's because One Punch Man isn't about long drawn out character battles. Rather, what it is, it's about explosive pockets of insanely intense action. Fights erupt with some of the best and hardest hitting animation in the industry, and end with decisive and often brutal finality. What it lacks in subtlety, it makes up for in brevity. No fight ever goes on longer than it needs to, and when it does, it's usually something spectacular to behold, like the insanely, and I hesitate to use this word, epic fight between Saitama and Lord Boros. Given the brevity of One Punch Man's fights, the show also does a good job of varying up its characters' skills and fighting styles. Watching Tatsumaki in a fight is an entirely different experience to, say, watching someone like Genos. And even minor characters like Golden Ball or Spring Mustache all have their own gimmicks and their own unique approaches to combat, which always keeps things feeling fresh and unique. What's more, the way One Punch Man builds anticipation for its fights is exceptional. One knows precisely how to build up an enemy so that we're never sure what to expect from the next large-scale encounter, even given Saitama's track record. Where things get really interesting though is when Saitama encounters the previously mentioned monster from the deep, the Sea King. In all previous arcs we've seen Saitama take out mostly what could be considered street level villains, or at least villains that other S-class heroes could have most likely defeated themselves. But the Sea King appears and he's an order of magnitude more dangerous than anything we've seen up to this point. Sea King proceeds to systematically take apart every hero who tries to stop him, including some of the Heroes Association's strongest S-class fighters. It's here that the tone of the show switches for the first time. The light and comical mood of previous episodes fades away to something with an actual air of tension and danger. Even the look of the show changes. Scenes that have taken place mostly in broad daylight with a bright and colourful palette now shift to the muted tones of a rain-drenched evening. In fact, it's at this point for the first time that things start to feel grim, even hopeless. Sea King's rampage has built up a real momentum, and the idea that anyone could take him down starts to feel more and more unlikely, even someone as powerful as Saitama. And there's a real tension as Saitama steps up to face the Sea King. Like, we want to believe Saitama can take this guy out, just like he's done for every foe up till now, but can he? Now, there's no way I'm going to spoil what goes down here, and in a way it nearly doesn't matter. My point is that for the first time in the show it feels like there's real danger. For the first time, we hope rather than believe that Saitama can win, which lies in stark contrast to every other fight he's been in up till now. This is essentially the first time the show starts to take itself seriously, and it's a shocking change of pace from the comedy escapades of earlier episodes. And in doing this, it proves that tonally, One Punch Man is capable of a lot more than we might have previously thought. One of my favourite things about One Punch Man is how it allows Studio Madhouse to really let loose with the animation, in particular with the action scenes. That's not to say the action in Madhouse's two previous shonen shows, Hunter x Hunter and Parasite, weren't great, because they absolutely were, but they were on a much more small scale, taking place in much smaller environments with characters that possess a much more limited ability set. It's awesome to see then that in One Punch Man, Madhouse's animators get to completely revel in the unbridled destructive chaos that the characters of the show bring. Skies split, buildings crumble, cities explode, and it's all gloriously animated in a way that only a studio on Madhouse's level could pull off. I think this is also the most free reign I've ever seen Madhouse take stylistically with a property. Fights explode in washes of neon colour, as in this scene with Carnage Kabuto. The cool thing here is that Madhouse uses this shift in colour to highlight the increased tension and danger of the scene, as the colour shift correlates directly with Carnage Kabuto's second transformation and vastly increased power. The camera is also expertly handled, as it swoops and dives around the combat. What's awesome here is that Satoru actually used similar techniques in his re-illustration of the manga, like in this scene where Genos and Saitama spar. You should look up the gifs for the other times Satoru does this in the manga. It's absolutely stunning. In fact, I'm going to leave links to these in the show notes below. The show also refuses to deal in visual cliches. No sweat drops, no chibi bullshit, but rather it develops its own shorthand based directly off one's original illustrations. This is never more obvious than the way the show can depict Saitama himself. One moment he's drawn as a super serious, tough looking badass, but the next he's nearly exactly how he was in the original manga. It's hilarious, but it's also a great window into how the character's feeling and what he thinks of the current situation. It's worth noting as well that both the soundtrack and its placement within the show are phenomenal, as you may be able to hear because that is the music I've decided to use for this video. And also just to mention that the opening sequence is just about some of the coolest shit I have ever seen. How someone is meant to watch this and not end up totally pumped is completely beyond me. Comedy is an inherently difficult thing to talk about from a review perspective. So much of it relies on the subtleties, context, and timing of a situation, it often gets lost when it's being recounted for a second time. That said, I'd like to go a little into why I think the comedic moments of One Punch Man work as well as they do. One of the most prominent ways that comedy is delivered through an anime is through what I like to call the comedy pause. If you watch enough anime, you'll probably have seen this many times. It's when, in an otherwise serious situation, two characters will get into a zany argument or disagreement of some sort and comically exchange barbs back and forth. The drawings go into token funny anime mode until eventually the camera pulls out to a third character who usually shrugs their shoulders and says something like, "Oh, those boys." I call these sections comedy pauses because essentially what you're doing here is halting the tone, plot, and story of an episode for the sake of a gag or two. I imagine the comedy pause is so prevalent in anime because it's simply very easy to write. You just need to pick a lull in the action, have a character point out something ridiculous, and boom, you're a comedic genius. Or I'm guessing that's how the writers see it at least. The problem with this kind of humour is that it's superfluous. It's not based in the world or characters themselves, it just makes things zany for a second. It's lazy writing, and more often than not, it's really not very funny. One Punch Man's humour is nearly the total opposite of this. It's a core part of the story and built into the world in a way that makes it inseparable from the rest of the show. Like, take any moment where Saitama curb stomps an enemy. It's nearly always funny because of how seriously the show takes its monsters and the time it puts into building them up. And when they're destroyed in an instant, the tension is released and we take in the ridiculousness of it all. And in these moments, it's really hard not to crack a smile. But despite the absurdity, it never breaks the world or compromises its characters. Take this moment in the battle against Carnage Kabuto when Saitama reveals that the source of his amazing power is actually just the result of a mundane training routine that involves doing 100 sit-ups, 100 push-ups, 100 squats, and running 10 miles every day. The idea that someone could get this powerful from that kind of training is obviously ridiculous. The fact that it does actually work only makes things more hilarious. Not only that, but the joke actually reveals a subtle but important detail about Saitama. And that is that he works hard. Even though there's no way it should give him that kind of power, that is a tough goddamn exercise regime. And the fact that he stuck to it every day to the point that he got to the level where he's at really says a lot about his work ethic and his commitment to being a superhero. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the comedy in One Punch Man is believable. It's not shoehorned in there and it never feels forced. It's a relevant part of the show as anything else is, and in doing so doesn't take away from the story and characters, but adds to them. The only real issue I have with One Punch Man is the same that I have with 99% of shonen anime, and that is that I would have liked to see more girls in the cast. It could have been a good chance to show off a wider range of characters, especially within the Superhero Association, but as is, there's maybe 5 named female characters in a cast of 50 plus. It's disappointing, especially given the fact that the female characters that are there are pretty cool. I really like Tatsumaki and Mosquito. I guess if I'm really digging deep here, I could say that the show's ending credits don't really do a whole lot for me either. The melancholy song over the static backgrounds wouldn't have been my choice for the show, but I guess there is something to be said for the absurdity of it, as these credits just seem so hilariously mismatched to the show. Ending credits in anime aren't that big a deal, but I do find when a show gets it right, it's really fucking awesome. For 2 great examples of this, see the first ending credits to Hunter x Hunter or the first ending credits to K-On! And really, that's about it for False. It does have what feels like the occasional filler episode, but even then One Punch Man's filler is still a lot stronger than most other regular anime episodes. So before we finish up here, there's one final aspect that I want to talk about that I feel is largely responsible for One Punch Man being the success it is. And that is, through all the jokes and all the ridiculous action, One Punch Man has some real fucking heart. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's look at this scene from episode 7, where one of Saitama's fellow superhero realizes Saitama's abilities and out of spite turns a crowd of onlookers against him. The crowd turns ugly and starts haranguing Saitama, shouting how he should just quit, how he's bad at what he does and needs to walk away. I remember first reading this part in the manga and thinking, okay, I get it now. Saitama's journey isn't going to be the usual quest for power of your typical shonen hero, it's going to be learning to believe in himself even if no one else does. But then I was completely shocked when one swerves, turning the scene on its head as Saitama angrily shouts back at the crowd, berating them and exclaiming defiantly that he's a hero for no reason other than himself, and he doesn't need nor care about their acknowledgement. There was always something about this scene that hit me especially hard, and after thinking it over for a while, I think I might know what it is. Essentially what you have here is a group of people telling someone that he's bad at what he does and that he shouldn't be doing it. Now, let's take a step back for a moment and take a look at One, the original author of One Punch Man. This guy, despite having little to no talent as an illustrator, somehow forced his ideas not only into existence, but to the point where they became a massive worldwide smash hit. Can you imagine the struggle this would have been, the determination it would have taken to keep working on a comic that looks like this in an industry that values aesthetics and draftsmanship above all things? How many times do you think One was told to give up and to stop trying? How many times do you think he came away from critiques and interviews disheveled? I'm guessing from how tough the Japanese manga industry is, it was a fucking lot. But somehow, One kept going. He kept writing his dumb webcomic and he never faltered. He never gave up, which could only be because his belief in his own stories and characters was absolute. Keeping this in mind, it's impossible not to look at this scene and see the author in it. Saitama's struggle for acceptance mirrors that of One's. Despite how difficult it can be, neither One nor Saitama ever gives up or stops believing in themselves. And you know what? That's fucking awesome. This, my friends, is writing. This is a story coming from a very real place. This shows that outside all the jokes, all the bombastic action and colossal fight scenes, One Punch Man has some real, legitimate heart. Both Saitama and the show's existence represent to me not only what can be achieved with hard work and perseverance, but also the message that no matter how bad things get, how overwhelming the odds, we just need to move forward and keep going. And this, more so than any other reason, is why you should watch One Punch Man. And guys, that's about going to do it for this video. I just want to say thank you for checking the video out, and I guess I also just wanted to say thank you to everyone who liked or commented on the Hunter x Hunter video. I was genuinely really surprised by the reaction it got, and that was a huge part of my motivation to do this video. If you guys have any further thoughts on One Punch Man or suggestions for future videos, I'd love to hear them. But for now guys, thanks for watching and see you next time.